Hello everyone, this is Music Tech Help Guy and welcome to part 8 of my Logic Pro 11 Essentials course. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create basic musical arrangements using Apple loops. Logic comes with an extensive library of audio, MIDI, pattern, and session player loops that can be pieced together to create full musical arrangements, or they can be used sparingly in your own compositions and recordings. The great thing about Apple loops is they can be set up to follow the key of your song. So even if a loop is in A minor, but your song is in C minor, that's not a problem. The loop will automatically transpose to match your song key. One other thing worth mentioning is that now with the new chord track and region chords that were introduced in Logic 11, some loops will carry chord progression information, and these chords can be automatically added to the chord track if you like, or not. And I'll show you toward the end of this video how to mitigate that. Before I get started, I need to quickly tell you about the long-term sponsor of the channel, Boombox. Boombox is the ultimate file storage and collaboration tool for musicians, artists, bands, producers, and mix engineers. However, Boombox also has some really cool networking and promotional tools. With Boombox, you can create your own custom public or private artist page. Let's transform my artist page from Music Tech Help Guy into an artist page for my new electronic project, Electrocosm. I'll change the display name to Electrocosm. I can customize the profile handle. Let's add in my album artwork as my artist photo. I'll add a header image, and I'll upload my 2 most recent tracks. You can set whether you want to be marked as available for hire, and then when you're ready, you can publish and share your profile. The Boombox artist page gives you your own space to share your music, network with others, and pick up work for hire. If you want to check out Boombox for yourself, head over to boombox.io today and get 4 gigabytes of free storage, or upgrade to one of their paid plans for more storage space and additional pro and premium features. Okay, so let's build out a really basic musical arrangement using loops. So I've just got a blank project here. Logic is going to force you to create at least 1 track. That's totally fine. We'll delete that in just a moment. And remember, you can press O to hide and show the loops browser. One of the things I highly recommend doing before you start dragging in loops is determine what meter and what key you want to work in. So right up here, you can see we're in 4/4 time, and then you can choose a major or minor key. Now, the reason why I recommend doing this is because some loops are major only, some are minor only, some of them don't matter, but we want to make sure that we're only using loops that match our project key. The loops will automatically transpose up or down, but if you have a loop that's in the key of C major, you're not really going to be able to make that work in C sharp minor, for example, because it's a completely different mode. It's a completely different type of key. However, transposing from, say, E minor to C sharp minor is no problem at all. So I'm going to go ahead and start in the key of E minor. You can always transpose this later if you need to, though. And one of the options right here in the loop browser is the scale. You can choose any, which is going to show all loops, minor key loops, major key loops, loops that are neither. These are a lot of like percussion and drum loops, or both. So these are ones that can be used either or. And likewise, there are different time signatures here as well, although you'll find most of these are in 4/4 time. Another thing you can show here is you can show just your audio loops, just your MIDI loops, just your pattern loops, just your session player loops. So there's 4 main types of loops. So your audio loops are going to be blue like this. Your MIDI loops are going to be green. Your pattern loops are going to be purple. And then your session player loops are going to be yellow. So all of these are MIDI except for the audio loops, or you can just simply choose to show all loops if you prefer. Likewise, you can search by instrument, genre, or descriptors. I'm going to go to instrument and I'll select beats. So I only get drum beats, and you'll see none of these really have a key. They all have different tempos, and that's totally fine. I'll show you how to deal with that later. And to play a loop, to audition a loop, you just simply click on it. Then click again to stop the playback. Okay, so there's a nice 4 on the floor beat. To drag this in, you just click and drag it below the lowest track in the project. And one thing I want you to note here is that this loop is at 125 BPM, but my project is 120. Watch what happens when I place it here. By default, you'll see that the first loop will change the tempo of your project. However, you can still change this back. If I want to go back to 120, I can totally do that, and the loop will play at 120. If I want to go a little faster, I can do that as well. Let's go ahead and stick with 125, the default tempo for that loop. But at this point, any other loops you drag in are going to adapt to the tempo of 125 BPM. I can go ahead and delete that extra software instrument track. And I don't want the main beat to start until bar 3, and then I want to repeat it a few times. So remember, you can press Command R to repeat regions. You can also hover over the upper right corner and click and drag. And then you can press Control L to convert these to regions. And then the third way, as you learned in the previous videos, to hold Option and then click and drag to duplicate. So lots of different ways to repeat and loop out your loops. Next, let's find a hi-hat. Let's pull that in here at bar 1. I'll hit Command R a few times to repeat that out. Let's see what that sounds like. Next, let's find a bass loop. And so this is where we're going to need to choose our scale. So I'm going to click the X button to reset my instrument selection. And I'm going to switch this over to minor because I only want to see minor loops. And from here, I'll search for bass and synthetic bass. Let's find a bass loop that works. So again, you can see here that this is an E flat minor, but the key is an E minor. When you drag this in, it's actually going to automatically transpose the loop up to the key that you've already selected. However, if you do want to hear a loop in its original key when you're auditioning it, you can come down here to the bottom of the loop browser. Let me just pull up that loop there. And this option right here, you can choose to play loops in the project key or in the original key. So project key is going to transpose E flat up to E. And then if I choose original key, you can hear that it's a half step or a semitone lower. So usually what I do is I keep this in the project key, but there are some reasons why maybe you would want to play it in the original key as well. So I'm just going to keep it in the project key for now. If I drag this in, let's see if this even works. I think it's going to be a bit too much. Yeah, something's not working there. So let's maybe not use that one. Let's find another one. Let's try this break-free synth bass. Let's drop that in at bar 3, and let's loop that out once. Yeah, that sounds a lot better. Let's add in a synthesizer, and let's try using some loops that are not audio loops this time. And let's find a synth loop that might fit. Let's try out this Analog Infinity 1. Let's drop that right there. Now, this is a pattern loop, so you can see it looks a little bit different. And pattern loops that contain region chords like this will also add those chords to the chord track up here. We'll come back to the chord track in a future video and do a deeper dive on that. But for now, let's say that I want to trim up this loop so that it's only 8 bars long, like the rest of the section here. So you can just use the trim tool that's on the right-hand side of the region, and you can trim that up. You can also use the split at playhead function I showed you earlier. Set the playhead where you want to split, then press Command T to split. And so then what I can do is I can drag over this whole section, hit Command R to repeat one more time. Okay, so let's say here at bar 11, I no longer want this loop here. I want to maybe put a different keyboard part here. Let's go back to the loop browser, and I've got 3 of them here labeled anthemic keys. Now, when you see loops that have the same sort of keyword in them, and then there are multiple versions of that loop, it generally means that they're all going to be the same instrument or the same style or part of the same sound pack. Yeah, let's try out anthemic keys too. Put that there, repeat that out a few times with Command R. So let's search up anthem or anthemic. And first I'll just clear my selection there. And I know there's a loop down here that works with this one, Saturday Anthem Pluck. So that's pluck 1 and pluck 2. Let's try pulling this one here. Let's repeat that once with Command R. And then let's try the pluck 2, and we'll repeat that as well. Yeah, these anthemic keys are just kind of getting in the way. Let's go with these plucks instead. I like the sound of these a little bit better. Yeah, and I think the bass isn't quite making sense here either, so let's swap that out for something that matches a bit better. Let's try out this Saturday Anthem synth bass. Repeat that a few times. Now, let's say that I wanted to sort of shift this whole pattern over to start on a different bass note and a different chord. What you can do is go up to your snap to grid options. I'll switch this over to bar so that as I move these over, they're only snapping to the bar lines. In fact, I want to go one more. I want to go to beat, because what I want is I want the whole sequence to start on this chord right here. So I'm just going to shift that over so the whole thing starts right there on that E minor chord. I'll repeat these out once, and then I'll just use the trim tool to trim these up. So you don't have to use loops as is. You can sort of shuffle them around and piece together your own musical arrangements this way. And you can also see that our stereo output is clipping. If that happens to you, and it's probably going to happen a lot, just drag over all of your tracks and then just pull all of their volume levels down in the mixer. And again, remember you can press X to hide and show the mixer. Now, just like with the audio regions and the samples I showed you in the previous video, you can drag over multiple MIDI regions and press J to join these and consolidate them into a new MIDI region. Okay, so let's go ahead and duplicate this first section here over at bar 19 here. So I'm going to go ahead and use my bar and absolute value snap, drag over all this, hold option, then click and drag it over. So let's build out a third section here. And I feel like the beat really needs a snare. So let's search up snare, and I need to change the scale to any. There we go. We've got this 80s power pop snare. Let's try dragging that in. Yeah, to change up this section, let's go ahead and remove the bass and synth, and let's find a new synth and a new bass line here. I like this one, the Kenmare Heroic Synth. Let's go ahead and drag that in. Now, one of the other cool things about using MIDI loops is when you double click on these, this opens up the piano roll editor, and you can actually fully edit any of the MIDI data inside of the piano roll editor. But another thing I like to do is I like to use chord tracks like this to derive bass lines. So what I can do is I can click on this track and then come up here and click this button to duplicate the track. You can also press Command D to duplicate tracks. And then I can hold Option, and I can drag this region down to the track. So I have a duplicate of both the track and the track content. Another way to do this, an even quicker way to do this, is just to Option click and drag the track down, and it'll make a duplicate of the track along with the region. So what I'm going to do in this one is I'm going to make this the bass. So what I'll do is I'll come into the MIDI editor and I'll delete all of the notes that are not the bass line. So basically I'm deleting all of the notes in the chords except for the very bottom note. Now, when you drag over notes, it's going to play back. If you don't want to hear that, you can click this button right here, and the notes will be silent as you drag over them. So I've got a separate bass region and a separate chord region, but we really should choose a different instrument for this. So to do this, let's press Y to open up the library. Let's go to Synthesizer, Bass, and let's try out this 80s pluck bass. So what we're doing is we're taking the MIDI from that original loop, taking some of the notes out of it, and then swapping it out for a completely different instrument. And likewise, if you thought that maybe these keys were a little low, you can actually transpose them up or down by an octave. There's a couple different ways to do this, but one way is to select the region, come over here to the region inspector, and you can actually transpose things by the octave, so 12 semitones. Semitones are essentially musical half steps, so C to C sharp to D, D to D sharp or E flat. There are 12 semitones per octave, or 12 half steps per octave. So if you set this to plus 12, you're transposing these chords up by an octave. So if you find that a loop, especially MIDI loops, are like in the wrong register, this is a really easy way to transpose them up and down. There is a shortcut for this. If you hold Shift and Option and then press up or down, you can transpose the region up or down by any number of octaves. Okay, so let's say that you've built out a musical arrangement and you want to send this over to a singer or a collaborator, and their vocal range doesn't match the key that you started in, and you need to transpose the entire musical arrangement over to another key. There's a very easy way to do this, but there's a little bit of background information with the chord track I need to tell you about first. So the chord track is a new addition in Logic 11 that allows you to input chords manually, or you can import them from loops that have region chords. And initially, when I dragged in this Analog Infinity 01 loop, what it did is it automatically pushed the chord progression that's on this region up into the chord track. If you need to access the global tracks, you can click right here. You can also press G to toggle the global tracks, and you should see a chord track. And if you don't see the chord track, simply right-click or control-click here and select chord. And then what you can do is you can actually click on these chord progressions and delete them. But one thing I want to show you is, like, let's say we wanted to re-import this Analog Infinity loop, and we didn't want the chords to automatically go up there. Let's just search up Analog Infinity, and if I drag this in, you'll see it automatically imports the chord track from the region chords. To prevent this, in the loop browser, go back down here, and you're going to select Keep Region Chords. So then when I drag this in, you'll see that it just keeps the region chords, but doesn't transfer that chord progression up to the chord track. Now, if you really do still want to import the chords up here, all you have to do is drag the region up to the chord track, and you'll see it inserts the chord progression for each of those selected regions that we drag up. Now, we don't necessarily need this because we're not using any session players at the moment, so I'm just going to leave it as is. So I'm going to close out the loop browser, and next let's talk about transposing this to another key. So right now we're in the key of E minor. Let's say that we need to go up to maybe G minor. A cool new option that's been included in Logic 11 is this new pitch source option in the region inspector. So if the pitch source on a track says key signature, it means that it will automatically transpose to whatever changes you make up here. So obviously the drums, we don't want that. And you can see that pitch source is turned off for the drum tracks. Here's the snare track. Once again, the pitch source is turned off. But for all of the other tracks, like the bass, the synthesizers, the synth plucks, all of these, we want to make sure that key signature is set as the pitch source for these regions. So all you have to do now is just switch the key up to G minor. It's going to ask you if you want to transpose chords. We'll say yes. And what's going to happen is all of these regions that have tonal information in them that are in a specific key are going to be shifted up to a new key. Or maybe the singer needs the key a little lower. Maybe we need to go down to D minor. We can do that exact same thing. So as long as a region is following the key signature for its pitch source, that region will automatically transpose up or down as you make key changes up here in the LCD display. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. As always, thank you so much for the support, and thanks for watching.